You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. After the British took control of Philadelphia on September 26, 1777, and an unexpected American attack at the Battle of Germantown fell short on October 4th, the Americans aimed to keep the British from using the city by blocking the Delaware River. To do this, they built 2 forts along the river. Fort Mercer was positioned on the New Jersey side at Red Bank Plantation, which was part of Deptford Township back then, and is now within National Park, New Jersey. The other, Fort Mifflin, was placed on Mud Island, right in the Delaware River, close to where the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers meet, and directly across from Fort Mercer in Pennsylvania. Holding these forts stopped the British Navy from delivering supplies to their forces in Philadelphia via the river. To strengthen their blockade, the Americans had a small fleet in the Delaware River, which included the Continental Navy ships and those of the Pennsylvania State Navy. This fleet, commanded by Commodore John Hazelwood, was made up of sloops, schooners, galleys, floating batteries, and 14 old ships filled with tar barrels to defend the river, armed with around 100 cannons in total. On the other hand, the British fleet, led by Admiral Howe, had 8 or 9 warships plus several transport vessels, boasting a total of 285 cannons on the warships alone, and even on just 2 of his ships stranded in the river, Howe had more men and officers than all of Hazelwood's fleet. On October 18th, following the unsuccessful attack at Germantown, General Sir William Howe, the British Army's leader, pulled back his forces into Philadelphia. He then directed some of his troops to take the 2 American forts blocking access to the Delaware River. Previously, Howe had also sent troops to Providence Island near the mouth of the Schuylkill River, close to Mud Island, to build artillery batteries aimed at bombarding Fort Mifflin. The initial attack on Fort Mifflin happened on October 11th, which was a limited assault, leading the British to bolster and intensify their artillery efforts. Near Fort Mercer, at Cooper's Ferry in Camden, New Jersey, 2,000 Hessian troops led by Colonel Carl von Donop landed, preparing to assault the fort located strategically on higher ground at Red Bank. Despite being outnumbered, the 400 men garrisoned at the fort, equipped with 14 cannons, were undeterred. At 4 p.m., Donop sent an officer to Fort Mercer with a summons to surrender, threatening that no mercy would be offered if they chose to fight. Colonel Greene, who was in charge of the fort, boldly responded, "We ask no quarters, nor will we give any," indicating their resolve to defend the fort to the very end. Believing the fort to be lightly defended, Donop was confident of victory, even suggesting renaming the fort after himself. After being repelled at the Second Battle of Trenton, von Donop was eager to redeem himself, boldly stating to his men, "Either that will be Fort Donop, or I shall be dead." Aware of the challenge ahead, Donop requested additional artillery from Howe, who instead told him to await the British fleet's support, hinting that if Donop couldn't take the fort, the British forces would. On October 20th, 1777, Captain Hammond led 5 British warships, including the heavily armed HMS Augusta under Captain Francis Reynolds, to support the operation. Donop then organized his 1,200 troops into 2 forces for a dual assault on the fort on the morning of October 22nd. He and Lieutenant Colonel von Linsing targeted the south, while Colonel von Minnigerode and Lieutenant Colonel von Mirbach aimed for the north and east. With naval support from the river, Donop was confident of victory. Unfortunately, his forces faced stiff resistance. Linsing's men were decimated by gunfire during their attempt to scale a 9-foot parapet. In the north, von Minnigerode's men overcame one obstacle only to be stymied by a dense barrier of sharpened tree branches and then targeted by American shooters. Amid the chaos, the Continental and Pennsylvania navies cut down the Hessians, who retreated 10 miles to Haddonfield. Donop was severely wounded and subsequently died in the Whitehall House, not far from the battlefield. Adding to the British and Hessians' woes, their naval support faced challenges from smaller American gunboats. The HMS Augusta and HMS Merlin ran aground while navigating past underwater defenses. Despite efforts to free them, the Augusta caught fire, leading to a massive explosion that resulted in its loss, marking it as the largest ship the British lost in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. There's debate over the cause, with some attributing it to the British and others to the design of the ship's defenses. Admiral Lord Howe seemed to lean towards the fire being sparked by cannon wads, following an explanation by a crew member. Following this disaster, the Merlin's crew was also forced to abandon and scuttle their ship. The Hessian army suffered losses totaling 377 killed and wounded, with an additional 20 missing or captured. Meanwhile, the American side reported 14 deaths and 27 injuries. Disappointed by the failure to take Fort Mercer, General Howe decided to pull Hessian units out of New Jersey and instead focus on seizing Fort Mifflin through a heavy artillery attack. By early November, British artillery positions were set up on Providence Island, supported by a fleet of warships. The assault on Fort Mifflin began on November 10, 1777, and continued intensely for 5 days, involving 6 British warships, along with the HMS Vigilant and HMS Fury, attacking the fort from close quarters. After the relentless 5-day bombing, 250 of the original 400 American defenders were either killed or wounded, and the fort's ammunition stores were running critically low. Major Simeon Thayer, the fort's commanding officer, made the tough call to evacuate Fort Mifflin on the night of November 15th, leaving the American flag flying proudly above the fort. The next morning, British troops landed without resistance, replaced the American flag with the Union Jack, marking a significant but low-cost victory for the British, who reported only minimal casualties and damage. Following the fall of Fort Mifflin, General Howe directed Lord Cornwallis and 2,000 men to capture Fort Mercer. They landed nearby and quickly advanced. To avoid being overrun, Colonel Christopher Green decided to evacuate Fort Mercer on November 20th, and the British took control the next day. The defeat at these forts dashed Washington's hopes of forcing the British out of Philadelphia by siege, leaving a direct engagement near his camp at White Marsh as his remaining military strategy. Although Howe briefly moved against the American position in early December, he eventually withdrew to Philadelphia for the winter, considering the American defenses too strong to assault. Meanwhile, Washington led his army to winter quarters at Valley Forge. Significantly, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, known by several names including Varnum's Regiment and the Rhode Island Regiment, distinguished itself on the American side. This unit was notable for its inclusion of free African Americans, enslaved individuals, and Native Americans. Those who were enslaved were promised freedom at the war's end, with their owners receiving market value compensation, underlining the diverse and complex nature of the forces fighting for American independence. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.